living areas. They're
Right.
a lot of times serving in big cities, and everybody, it's all hands on deck.
Okay, folks, it looks like we have resolved our technical issues, and so we welcome you back here to Shaftesbury Society, coming to you live from Midtown Raleigh. And so what we're doing today is talking about military issues here in the state of North Carolina. You know, we talk a lot about how we have a big military footprint, but we also want to be military proud. And we do a lot of things well in this country, in this state, to support active duty and retirees, veterans, but there are things that we can improve on. So we wanted to give you a really wide-ranging perspective today as we look forward to Memorial Day. I'm going to go ahead and reintroduce our panelists in case you have joined us late here. First of all, Donna King is the editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. She has lived the military spouse life. Her husband is an Air Force veteran. Also joining the panel, John Burns, Director of Education for Concerned Veterans for America. He is a combat veteran and has a wide-ranging service that we'll let you learn about as we go through our panel today. State Senator Michael Lazzara represents District 6 in the Senate. He enlisted in the Marines and has a service in a variety of places, including time at Camp Lejeune. And Representative John Soka is out of District 45. That's where he represents in the North Carolina House. He is a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. Donna, I'm going to go ahead and start with you again to make sure that we catch up our viewers here to Shaftesbury Society. Donna, tell us a little bit about the life of a military spouse.
Sure. Well, it's increasingly unique, actually. Yeah, I think about 0.5% or so of members in this generation serve. So then you have, of course, spouses and families impacted as well. It's an exciting, fun life, lots of travel, and you meet such wonderful people. It's a close-knit community. But I would have to say, just like for lots of families, unemployment is a huge issue among military spouses because a lot of times they move every 2 to 3 years or so. And military spouses have about a 22% unemployment rate, and for lots of families that is just untenable. They can't really survive, and it's stressful on the family. Occupational licensing is something a lot of states, including North Carolina, have worked on to make sure mostly healthcare, education licenses are reciprocal from state to state at the federal level. That bill is moving a little bit. It's been introduced a few times and failed. They're trying it again, but really it's an important part of keeping a military family intact and happy and healthy, making sure that they have the income that they need and that spouses can work wherever they are.
Senator Lazzara, I know that issue, as well as several others, are really top of mind to you. Tell us what's really on your mind as you serve in the state Senate and have an opportunity to actually propose different policies that address some of these things.
Well, good morning. And first of all, thank you. And thank you for those on the panel that have served. I certainly appreciate your service. You know, my goal in, representing District 6 and the 4th largest military footprint in the country is to ensure that when we talk about being a military friendly state, that we continue to enhance that through different legislation and creating an environment that we can truly back up what we say. And one of my goals is the military retiree state taxing. I believe we're losing a great deal of people that retire, service members that retire, that go to other states because they're tax free. Florida, and you have a handful of states that are like that. And through some studies that have been conducted, we're losing, we could gain over 1,000 military retirees per year at an income of about $250 million a year in lost revenues, to include contracting organizations and businesses that could also enhance that perspective. But again, I just believe that there's still so much that we can do to ensure that our military footprint not only stays intact, but can continue to grow. And the support for family members and military spouses, she's absolutely on point. They are one of the best work pools that we can tap into, but we really need to work on the licensure piece.
Representative Soka, what issues are most important to you when it comes to the military footprint?
We only have an hour, so I can't list them all. I can't kind of group them into 5 categories, though, and certainly financial and income tax relief for military retirees is at the top of my list this session. And Michael, be on the lookout for House Bill 83 when it crosses over from the House to the Senate. So there's financial and income tax issues. There's family support issues, which I say encompasses the occupational licensing requirements. We've made some progress in that for various things, the nursing compact, the physical therapy compact. I mean, that's made if they have those licenses, it's made a difference. There's educational opportunities. That's really broken into 3 parts. That's for educational children, where North Carolina is a member of the Interstate Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children, which looks at making sure that when children come between different states, there's different state requirements that they don't get lost in the shuffle. There's spouse part of that, and then there's the service members themselves. Then there's the whole category of military base encroachment issues and infrastructure with DOT supporting. We've passed various bills to limit encroachment right up to the boundary of military bases, because if you go right up to the boundary and start putting up skyscrapers, all of a sudden you can't do flight ops and things like that. Then there's kind of a catch-all thing that I call like other items. And in 2019, the Service Members Civil Relief Act that dealt with if people are alerted to go off to war. I mean, how do you handle leases, long-term leases, and evictions and things like that? So that helped clarify that, not only for active duty, but for National Guard members being activated. So there's a lot of things that have been done, but there's still a lot of work needs to be done. But it kind of, in my mind, groups into those 5 major groups.
John, you are a veteran who decided to make North Carolina your home, and now you're with Concerned Veterans for America. And I know that health insurance and healthcare issues for veterans are really important to you. Why?
So, Concerned Veterans for America, one of our signature issues, and we focus more on national policy than we do on state policy. One of our signature issues has been VA healthcare and injecting choice into the veterans' opportunity to get healthcare, right? We believe that just like Medicaid and Medicare and TRICARE, veterans healthcare should be provided with choice, not focused only at government-run centers, right? And in fact, not only does every other federal healthcare program work that way, but every other VA program works that way. So if you buy a home loan or borrow a home loan with VA guarantee, or if you use the GI Bill, you don't have to go to the Bank of Veterans or go to West Point or Veterans University. All of those have choice in there. In terms of North Carolina, one of the things that Concerned Veterans for America has been working very hard on and pushing with our partners from Americans for Prosperity is the SAVE Act and other opportunities to expand choice for veterans, because we have been successful with the Mission Act in injecting community care and broadening choice for many veterans. We continue to fight. We're supporting on a national level 4 different bills that would expand choice even more for veterans. But if there's not an opportunity in North Carolina for veterans to get expanded care, because we're not doing things like the SAVE Act and expanding scope of practice, if we're not repealing certificate of need, and it's hard for veterans who live in the western or down eastern parts of the state to get local health care. I've actually got jets flying over from the Navy right now, if you're hearing that. Thank you to the U.S. Navy and their FAA teams. But anyway, expanding healthcare options in North Carolina is important because it tears right into Concerned Veterans for America's national policies. In terms of some of the other things that folks talked about, employment, occupational licensing, we support our partners at American Prosperity in the idea that what's good for the middle class is good for veterans, right? The vast majority of veterans in this country live in that middle class, right? So as Donna mentioned, veterans who or military members who move from state to state, spouses who can't get occupational licensing, right? It should be the same for those military spouses as it is for all the citizens of North Carolina. What's good for those spouses is good for North Carolina. We should open up the occupational licensing here in North Carolina. We should repeal those certificate of need. These policies are good for the middle class, and that's what's good for veterans, right? There are a few veterans who are very wealthy, very few. There are a few veterans who are very, very poor, and we support projects through our foundation, CVA Foundation. We support projects like the Veterans Life Center up in Butner that work to alleviate veterans' homelessness and veterans' poverty. But overall, veterans live in that middle class. So what's good policy? Low taxes, easy access to health care, low barriers to employment, low government barriers to employment. That's what we're driving for at the state level from Concerned Veterans for America.
As I listen to all of you describe your particular interests and concerns, there seems to be a common theme, and that is rules that, while maybe well-intentioned in the beginning, are really getting in the way of people being able to access the care they need, get the job they need to earn a living. So it's about kind of getting the rules out of the way so people can live their lives more productively.
Absolutely. And I think years ago, one of the licensure changes that we did was for heavy equipment operators. You know, some of the best training, and John will probably attest to this, for heavy equipment operators is in the military. But we were finding that when we had young men and women getting out of the military, they would have to, go through that whole process all over again. And some years ago, we were able to make those changes. And that's been an enormous benefit, because many of them stay here and they're moving to Charlotte, Greensboro, where a lot of the trucking heavy equipment firms are, and they're getting jobs and staying here. So it makes a considerable difference when you can make some of those unique changes. One of the other things that we probably need to discuss at some point is, the homelessness, veteran homelessness, suicide rates, and of course, the continued mental health care that they so desperately need.
And the senator's absolutely right. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed some laws, for example, on truck drivers. You have a lot of military guys and gals who are driving bigger than big rigs in the military. So what those two laws did was you were able to transfer that experience and not take all of the truck driver tests, and you already got credit for that, which put more truck drivers on the road. And at the time, that was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, there's a shortage of 40,000 short and long haul truck drivers in North Carolina alone. So it's those types of things in industries, as the senator articulated very well, that we pick up on and pass those laws to help that. So what's really important for us as legislators, I believe, is for organizations like John Locke to come back and say, well, what about this? Because we don't know everything. So John Locke, Carolina Journal can help point those things out. Our constituents help point those things out. And as they come up, for the time I've been in the legislature jumps on it fairly quickly and tries to resolve some of these overly bureaucratic issues that need to be knocked down.
There are so many transferable skills too, from someone who's been in the U.S. military, and that gets us into that issue of trying to recruit people to actually stay here, because they do have a lot of options. And essentially, North Carolina competes against 49 states and other countries, presumably, to attract all of that skill of people who are still in their working age and want to still earn a living and contribute that way, and also to folks who have maybe had a longer military career and are ready to retire to one of the great places in this country, and we'd like them to stay here as well.
Absolutely. And what's not considered is if a young man joins the military, young man or woman joins the military at 20, they can retire at 40. And at 40, you still have a great career ahead of you, a second career, and many have third careers. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think we need to not only say we're a military friendly state, we need to act upon that and continue to enhance that. And I will say, as a freshman senator, I've been very pleased to know that whenever we talk about veteran issues or veteran legislation, there seems to be a great deal of consensus amongst the House and Senate members that it's the right thing to do. Some legislation obviously is easier to pass than other, but I think the consensus is, hey, this is something we've got to do for all the right reasons. And I think that's been one of the great joys of finding out that that's the consensus between the two parties.
Donna, I know that your husband is one of those who retired at a very young age, still many years left to be able to pursue a different avenue, a different career. So if you've actually experienced what it's like to say, okay, time for a new start.
Right. And I think that is one thing that keeps a lot of them in the Northern Virginia, DC areas. They are really actively recruited into some of the government contracting and technical support roles there, but it's still a high cost of living. So learning how to tap into that workforce, that labor pool of military members who are either ready to get out or ready to retire, because you're right, they are quite young. You know, at 20, you're ready at 40 to move on and maybe do something else. That is a tremendous labor pool that we can offer businesses that are coming here, particularly in high-tech fields. That's something we don't think about as much because a lot of that technology and that investment was made in the military and by military services, and they're bringing that knowledge and that experience into the private market and the private companies. It's a tremendous asset. But you know what may stop them before they even get to that point is crisis intervention. We were just talking about that a minute ago with post-traumatic stress disorder, or some of these other things that they can get involved in. I know Representative Zoka has been involved in that as well, trying to get some help on the table for folks who are struggling with that. And if those resources are here and that job market is here and that labor pool is here, it would be a huge benefit to North Carolina.
Representative Zoka, what about that? People who are having trouble adjusting, having trouble dealing with maybe some of the situations that they've seen in a combat situation. What do we do for them?
That's a tough nut to crack, as they say, because even in spite of all the help that's available in the military, a lot of service members don't necessarily come forward and ask for that help. There's still a little bit of a cloud, if it's only in your own mind, when people think that they need help. So what's really important is for the spouses to assist their service members to ask for that and do it, because there's no shame in asking for help. There just isn't. When folks come out, getting into the VA system, there are issues in the VA system and getting the proper help, and a lot of those have been dealt with, but there's still some issues there too. It's one of those things that I don't know that there's a single clear answer on how to solve that. But what it is what I like to see is by retaining more military members in the military community, for example, Cumberland County, we're home to Fort Bragg, you're more attuned to what your neighbor might have gone through. And maybe we're a little bit better here at helping our neighbors once they've made the transition to the civilian sector from the military sector and helping them along. But it's one of those things, no single answer. We need to continue to work on.
North Carolina's made great strides, particularly during the Governor McCrory years, at building a Veterans Affairs component, a Veterans Affairs administration that in state that did a good job of using resources effectively to connect veterans to solutions through public-private partnerships, through networking with nonprofits. The America Serves, NC Serves concept was a great concept. But there's still a huge problem with mental health and suicide in the entire veterans community. And a lot of it has to do with the kind of the difference between being connected to service members. If you're in the Army or the Marine Corps, your platoon sergeant is there 22 out of 24 hours a day, living in your hip pocket. And if you have a problem, your platoon sergeant and your squad leader know about it and they can intervene. Once you get out, that support system is gone. Your neighbor is no longer at your house 24 hours a day. They're no longer in your life 100% of the time. Your spouse and your friends may or may not know what to look for. They may or may not know where to find resources. And the problem is particularly acute with soldiers who are, or airmen who are serving in the National Guard or the reserves component, where they're undergoing these deployments. They're not going back to a base housing kind of situation. They're being ejected out into communities like Clayton. They're being ejected out into communities like Charlotte, coming off a deployment where they may have developed post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're in an environment where it's not there. So there's a huge education piece to that. The military has been trying desperate to solve for mental health and suicide awareness, but there's a lot of work to be done there. And a lot of that is community focused, right? How do we get resources into the hands of as Representative Zoka said, Fayetteville's, Cumberland County is a great place, but there are veterans spread throughout this state, and not every county has that density where, there's a former platoon sergeant or a former, company commander living on the same block who's just going to go, hey, my neighbor over there is starting to show some signs of real trauma. Let me go talk to him. If you live in Horry County or you live in Dare County, you're not going to necessarily have that kind of density of veterans who can help you. And it's educating the rest of the public. That's a piece that we have to solve for.
Yeah. Go ahead, Senator.
I was going to say another tool that we need to continue to develop is these military veteran courts that could alleviate some of the the criminal aspects of of the mental illness and TBI and post-traumatic stress disorder. I think the support of those veterans courts are going to be very crucial throughout the state. There are several there now. We have several now, And I think it's something we need to continue to expand on.
How
The
do they
other,
work, Senator?
basically, they go through instead of a criminal procedure, it's more of a military procedure where they put them back in programs instead of filtering them into the criminal system. If they're low level, non-violent crimes where they're just drug related crimes. And I think they've been working very well for many of the service members to get them back into a recovery program and a recovery system so that they can sort of get their lives back in order instead of, being in the criminal system. Very effective. Again, I think we have 4 or 5 in the state. I know that we're trying to get one, and here we are in Jacksonville, North Carolina, home of Camp Lejeune, the largest amphibious training center in the country, and we don't have anything like that here. So, one would assume that we have everything we need, but as Representative Zocco will tell you, we still have to continue to strive to do better for our service members, no matter where we're located. The other point I wanted to make very quickly was Veterans Affairs, our Veterans Affairs office and veteran homes. That's a program that's going to continue to grow, and hopefully that we can enhance to combat suicide prevention and of course care for our service members, not only at a younger age but at an older age. And John, you could probably touch on that some.
Well, you're absolutely right about everything you said. I mean, particularly the Veterans Courts, there's one been operating here in Cumberland County that is good. I mean, it has great results. And the judge who's presiding over that, Judge Olivero, is an Army veteran. He was a JAG officer. So he not only understands it at a theoretical level, he understands it in an actual level. And certainly I think that we need a lot more veterans courts and some of these other specialty courts, not only in military dense communities, but across the state. You'd be surprised at how many former service members there are that had service and live in the Charlotte area, live in Wake County. I mean,
Exactly right.
there's a large density. So it's not just in Cumberland County and Onslow. We need more of that really across the state.
John, you mentioned that one of the issues that some veterans struggle with is when they are out of the active military, that they don't have the same type of tight support structure or people who are there around them to kind of help them to make their decisions or get back on track if a leader sees them getting off track. I wonder too about the fact that with so many deployments that we've seen and the conflicts that we have experienced over the last 20 years or so, that there are people who really are simply reacting to things that they have seen or experienced during combat. And so few of us now serve. It's really hard for someone like me, even though my husband is a Navy veteran, he did not serve in combat. He was on a training carrier. It's hard for me to understand actually what it is like to be in a situation where you're fighting a war, whether it's declared officially as a war or not, or whether it's called a conflict or boots on the ground, where you're actually fighting, killing other people for a presumed goal and taking your own life in your hands every day. For those of you who served in combat, what is it like?
It's particularly challenging to reconnect when you come back from a combat deployment. I would, and I came back from I call it a half a combat deployment in Somalia when I was in the Marine Corps back in the early 90s. And I went back to my Marine Corps base and I was with my Marine buddies and we had that kind of that ability to watch out for each other. There was still some difficulty, even though it wasn't like a full combat situation. It wasn't a very long time. There were still some adjustment difficulties. The next time I had that adjustment was, 12, 13 years later when I came back from a year in Iraq, and I went from being in Iraq to being in my living room within about a week and a half, and being in my civilian living room, and that's particularly challenging. The high point of kind of veterans in this country, where we had the most veterans, both in terms of raw numbers and in terms of percentage of Americans who served, was in the late 1980s. When we still had many World War I veterans, most of our World War II, Korean veterans, and almost all of our Vietnam veterans still alive. Those numbers have dwindled because of the lack of a draft, which for the military is a very, very good thing, right? We prefer our all volunteer force as military leaders. I'm sure both Representative Zocca and Senator Lazzara, would support that, right? I mean, we're better at doing what we do with an all volunteer force, but it does come at the price of connectedness. It does come at the price of being connected as a society from our citizens to our warriors. And there's really never been a greater divide than there is now. I mean, we've had 2 decades at war since September 11th, 2001, and yet we've had the smallest number of Americans served in the military during that war, percentage-wise, and Americans overall are divorced. I mean, it wasn't intentional, but a few days after the September 11th attacks, a few days before we began the war in Afghanistan, President Bush told Americans, "Well, just go shopping," and that's kind of been, in many ways, the philosophy. Go shopping, put a yellow ribbon on your bumper, and you're good. And you're right, Americans don't understand what veterans went through, and veterans deeply seek connection. They deeply seek connection, but many of the old ways of connecting are either gone for veterans or they're not right for this generation of veterans, right? So the American Legion, the VFW, they're struggling to get numbers, even though we have more combat veterans today than we've had at any time since the 80s, because younger veterans just don't want to join those organizations. On the other hand, Student Veterans for America is one of the largest veterans organizations in the country right now, and one of the most dynamic. So veterans are trying to find new ways to connect. They're trying to find new ways to build that connection and keep that community, but it is an ongoing issue. How do we kind of bridge that civil military divide in a healthy way?
If I could just jump in here in a minute, I was in the military before anybody else on the panel today. I was commissioned in '76 and lived through the last few years of the all-volunteer Army, and there was still an anti-Vietnam, anti-military sentiment in the country, that it was at the point in my first 2 assignments, first Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, then Fort Hood, Texas, you were not allowed, being in the Army, you were not allowed to stop to shop on the way home. In your uniform, the only thing you were allowed to do was to stop if your car needed gas and you couldn't get home without filling it up. I mean, it was not a friendly country to military veterans in the late '70s and even the early '80s. So even though we have a lot of issues now, that's one thing that veterans don't have to worry about now, is getting spit on in an airport, which I was, or being met with hostile glances and middle fingers and things like that from people when you got a distance away from military bases. I think at whatever time you get out of the military, it's all, and Donna mentioned it early on, it's that connectiveness the military members have and their families have. You go from one post to another, you see a lot of the same people, you have that bonding going on that you're never far away from anybody. And in the civilian world, it's not duplicated anywhere that I'm aware of. I mean, in the companies I've started and owned, I've tried to formulate that and take people out to lunch and stuff like that. But it's just different that I can't really explain too much in the shared experience. But we've got some work to go on here. But trust me when I say that it's a whole lot better than it was in the late '70s and the early '80s.
Donna, shared experience is what Representative Zocca is talking about here. And again, it's hard for people who haven't served to try to relate to that, to begin to understand what the dramatic shift is once one leaves that type of environment.
It is, and it's really hard because military is a community, and your children are all friends, your spouses are friends, you work together. There's very few people outside of the military that understand what that experience is like, and that's what I would like to see build in North Carolina. And I think these networks, I think a lot of us have taken for granted that you can find anything you need, from therapy to support to banking online, and it's just not a substitute. We have to have these in-person groups, and we have to find like-minded folks who've had similar experiences and encourage them to connect with each other. We're human beings, and we need other human beings, and it can't be replaced with a website or online resources, and it's certainly supplemented. But I think particularly the younger generation of veteran and their families are used to finding everything online because that's how we function. particularly if you're not near a large base. But finding that personal connection is incredibly important for a healthy economy and a healthy family, and spouses that work and children that can play sports when they move and all those other things that are so important. But some of this goes also to business development for North Carolina. When we bring companies that support the military here, we employ people. We have a administration and business leaders that understand the military community and can try to create it in their new location in North Carolina. It's hugely important, and it helps all of our bottom line.
I'll tell you, you mentioned earlier about me deciding to stay in Jacksonville, North Carolina. There's absolutely no other place that I'd rather be than around my military friends and families, and to be able to have continued to support those families and those service members has been an absolute honor and a privilege. And I'm sure Representative Zokas feels the same way, being in Cumberland County. I mean, the gratitude that you get from ensuring that families are taken care of while their loved ones are deployed, and whether it's a service related issue or education or anything at all. I mean, that's what our communities are built upon, and I think we need more of that. We learn early on in the service that there's no greater love than the person to the right and to the left of you as you serve. And that is the absolute truth. Those are relationships that you can never find once you exit the military, unfortunately, and that's just how it is. But, I think as a state, we've made tremendous progress in support of our military. And I think it's something that we need to certainly continue to do and attack one piece at a time, so that we can truly say that we are a military friendly state. So
why is it that, I'd love your thoughts on this, all of you, why is it that so few people serve?
I'll take a whack at that one, because I was the G3 of the Army's recruiting command for a couple of years. Once you get away from areas like Onslow County and Cumberland County have high populations of veterans and active duty military, people get most of their information from watching old movies on TV. I mean, as stupid as that might sound, they don't understand that today's military service, and for the last 30 years, has been high tech. It's not follow me, just do what I tell you. It's not ordering you around, making people drop for push-ups. You have to be very intelligent and to first of all get in to any one of the armed services. Then you have to be able to use your knowledge for technology and all kinds of other things. And I'm talking about just a regular old infantry guy like me. I mean, you would not believe the amount of technology you deal with on a daily basis, whether it's personal equipment or crew served equipment or whatever. So we've got this idea that being in the military, and I think it's less now than it was maybe in the 80s and the 90s, was that you're just going to do what people order you to do. You're this non-thinking automaton that you just do what your officers and NCOs tell you to do, and you have no personal individuality or anything else. Couldn't be further from the truth. Could not be further from the truth. Everyone is inculcated with the values that in lack of orders, to do what the right thing is, and it's amazing that our enemies or our potential adversaries in the past did not have that same type, and some of them still do not have that same type of freedom of leadership and freedom of action in their military that we have in ours. So you come out of the military, whether it's a 4-year enlistment, whether it's a career, you have something that civilian employers want. First of all, you're drug free. Second of all, you know how to take direction and guidance to do things, and you show up to work on time. I can't tell you the number of employers locally and across the state I've talked to that say, oh, if we can only get more people like that. It's like, we got 8,000 of them coming out of here at Fort Bragg, come on down. So it's part of it's an education issue just with the civilian populace, because TV shows and movies don't really, a lot of them don't accurately reflect the high-tech, high-touch environment that today's military you have to have, and you have to be proficient in to be successful.
You know, I remember when I was a kid, granted, this was decades ago, but I can remember in elementary school every year, we had a gentleman named Colonel Redburn who would come visit our school every single year, and we would have essentially a special event, and we would all walk outside, and he would talk to us about the flag and his service. And I can tell you at the time, of course, for little girls, I wasn't thinking about a potential career in the military, but the little boys were, and the little boys were mesmerized by this gentleman. And we were all left every year kind of in awe of the things he had to say about our country and how important service to country is. And I know that may sound a little bit Pollyannish for the days we're living in 2021, but my goodness, you know, it left an impression on me decades later. I remember that man, and I kind of wonder if we've lost that.
We have, Donna. Retired colonels aren't particularly welcome at secondary education facilities and primary education facilities anymore. Teachers, the teaching profession is just disconnected from that. And in fact, to your earlier question, one of the reasons so few people serve is there aren't that many opportunities with a professional all volunteer force. I mean, there's only 3.5 million job opportunities, and that includes the reserve component, and only a few thousand open, on a weekly basis for training candidates. What's really unique, though, is that there's been a greater divide between the college educated kind of ministerial East Coast elite class and the folks serving in the military, of whom there are fewer and fewer of those college educated folks and the children of college educated folks. I mean, if you think about the institutions of information in our society, the media, publishing, education, a writer at the New York Times, a professor at Duke or UNC, they don't want their kids joining the military, and they're pushing them into different career paths. What we're really developing is a two-tiered society where the kind of folks who think their kids are going to end up in a police department or a sheriff's department, the kind of people who think that their kids should serve because they served, their children are serving, but the children of folks who more and more run the country, more and more run the economy, fewer and fewer of them are serving. And there's a bigger divide there than there is just between the general community and the military. It's really between kind of the elite, college educated class and the military, and that's that's even including the fact that the entire officer corps and many of the enlisted corps are educated, some of them at elite universities, but still there's this kind of divergence between the folks who are like headed towards the ministerial class and the folks who are in the working class, and it is a big divide in our society.
We're not seeing guidance counselors. I'm sorry, we're not seeing guidance counselors talk to kids as much as we used to about going in the military. A lot of folks are saying, well, let's go to community college, let's go to universities. The military isn't presented as an option, not because they probably don't like it, but it's more that I think teachers and guidance counselors and parents don't know enough about the opportunities that are available to children.
I was going to say that back in my recruiting days, there's an acronym, TEAMS, TEAMS, that stands for why people join. First one is training. If you want to be a diesel mechanic and your family can't afford it, you can train to be a diesel mechanic. You can train to be a corpsman. You can train to be any one of these things. So it's training. Education. There's an opportunity for community college going for other college. Adventure, some people, they like to jump out of airplanes. And for the Air Force people, there's no such thing as perfectly good airplanes. So let's just put that aside. Money. There's enlistment bonuses for certain military occupational specialties that range very high. If you want to be a linguist or if you have special skills or whatever, there's also the money for education when you get out. And the last one was the one that you had mentioned, service to country. We saw that depending on what's going on in the world situation, when I was at the headquarters recruiting command, you would see some of the others bounce up, go down right after the Somalia issues. That service to country, that there were a lot of people coming in with that, but a lot of parents wouldn't let their kids enlist because they were afraid of them going off to Somalia and winding up in a similar situation. So those are the buying motives, if you will, or the decision motives of somebody coming into any of the armed forces today. And we all kind of compete amongst ourselves, the Army, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard, because there are only you have to be qualified. You can't go in there on a frame built like mine and weigh 400 pounds. You're not going to get in. So we have issues right now with young men and women not being in shape, having prior convictions for things, stupid kind of drug stuff. Some of that can be waived, some of it can't. So once you start with the whole enlistable, potentially body of young men and women in the country, it gets real small real fast. And then you're dealing with parents don't want you to come, or this or that, or the other thing. So, I mean, all these things go into it, but I would just say to anybody who's listening on this, it's a great opportunity for anybody, no matter what your social background, race, color, creed, that you will come out a better person than you went in.
Donna, I know that at Carolina Journal, you're now leading the team there as editor-in-chief, and I know that you're going to be paying special attention to issues of the military, whether it's active duty or the physical footprint here in North Carolina, or these occupational issues and the ability of a spouse to earn a living in North Carolina. Tell us some of the things that you think you're going to be paying most close attention to, and then we'll get to Representative Soka and Senator Lazaro to talk about what we can expect maybe at the legislature if they've got some things cooking. Donna, are you there? Okay, I think we lost her connection. So, Senator, tell us what we can expect if you've got some bills that you're working on right now. Just briefly, what you're hoping to move here.
Well, thank you. And as Representative Soka talked about earlier, there's a House bill coming through that I believe will hopefully address the state tax exemption. I know that we have a bill in the Senate as well that did not move, but hopefully we can move the other one as it comes across, because I think that's a very important issue. The other issue that we didn't touch much on was potential BRACs and wind, renewable energy and wind as it approaches North Carolina coast. We need to ensure that we are cognizant about the impacts of wind turbines as it relates to military training. I think this has been before the General Assembly several years ago, but it's coming back, and I think we need to be prepared for that, because as people do not understand that the government will close a military base if they're unable to train their men and women to go in harm's way, regardless of the size or the investment that it has in that particular training center. And we know this from the Philippines and Clark Air Force Base and some other training facilities. So I think that that's something we need to pay attention to. I think we need to try to develop a statewide overlay map so that we can clearly identify training areas, and so that renewable energy, as it comes to North Carolina, we can clearly define where it can go and where it can't go, so it's not a constant fight. So that's a big one for me as it comes forward. And then these occupational licensing issues, as we can attack those as they come forward, I think that would be a priority for me as well.
Representative Soka, the senator just mentioned the footprint and the encroachment. I think you also referenced that earlier in our conversation, having concerns about potential military encroachment, people coming very close to those bases.
Yeah, I did mention it. That's one of the major things we have to make sure that we do protect our military bases, and not only the military bases, but the training areas. For example, the flight paths. And a couple of years ago, we had the wind issue. I worked very closely with the clearinghouse at Department of Defense to make sure that we weren't impacting not only Air Force capabilities, but also Navy capabilities, because the Dare County bombing range, located in Dare County, is truly a one-of-a-kind resource for all branches of the military. I won't bore you with all details on that, but that's important to make sure that we keep bases and training areas free from encroachment of all types. And my other big priority is House Bill 83, making military retirement pay exempt from North Carolina state income tax. There are some folks who try and equate military retiree with state retiree pay, and I don't have enough time to describe all the differences, why they're not equivalent. But I continually hear from folks on active duty or about to retire. It's like, I would stay here, but you can and we lose probably thousands of highly qualified people in the prime of their life. And statistics have shown that over half of these folks, when they retire, go into small business for themselves. I mean, I use myself example. I retired at the age of 42. I've had 4 small businesses since then, and you know, all successful to some extent. And I've still got one of those going. You know, so that's really my number one focus here in the next couple of weeks, to get House Bill 83 out of the House and over to the Senate, and hopefully we can do that in short order.
John, I know you're going to be watching all of this legislation, but John, also with Concerned Veterans for America, it's that healthcare issue that you all are really focusing on as well.
I was going to say, I'm sure both of you gentlemen, especially you, Senator Lazaro, will be hearing from my colleague Richard Disney, the coalition director for North Carolina. You know, I know Representative Zocca was a co-sponsor on HR 277, the SAVE Act. We're hoping that it passes in the Senate and that we can get it signed. There's not a single bill from the CVA perspective that's better for veterans healthcare in North Carolina in the North Carolina Assembly legislature this year, right? Than HR 277, S249. We think that's the best thing right now that could happen for veterans healthcare in the state of North Carolina. So we will be watching all the other bills. We'll be watching, paying attention to encroachment, paying attention to certificate of need, and especially to occupational licensing reform. But for us, the SAVE Act is really the big rock we want to move up the hill this year.
And of course, here at the John Locke Foundation and at Carolina Journal, we will be paying close attention to all of these issues that we have been talking about here today. I want to thank my colleague Donna King, editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal, John Burns with Concerned Veterans for America, State Senator Michael Lazzara, and State Representative John Zocca. Folks, thanks so much for giving us your perspective today. We appreciate your service, not only in the military, but your service now that you have left the military and are working to try to make North Carolina not only military friendly, but military proud. Thanks for being with us today. And folks, thank you very much for joining today as well. We really appreciate you being interested in what we're doing here at the John Locke Foundation. We would leave you with this thought. If you want to help fuel this type of work, this type of conversation, the reporting, the rigorous reporting of Carolina Journal, for example, we'd ask you to consider a tax-deductible donation to the John Locke Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization, and that means we rely on you to support our work. It's very fast and simple. Just go to johnlocke.org, and in the upper right-hand corner of that website, of the homepage, you're going to see a Donate tab. Just click on that, and in less than 2 minutes, you can make a secure, tax-deductible financial contribution to the John Locke Foundation to help us continue our work. We would greatly appreciate your support. I want to thank you all for joining along. Good luck with the gas situation this week as we all kind of struggle through this Colonial Pipeline situation. Be sure to check carolinajournal.com at least twice a day for the very latest on what's happening in North Carolina. And of course, be sure to follow all of the research and analysis of what's going on in the General Assembly and also with the Biden administration at johnlocke.org. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week. We'll see you back here next Monday.